Ashes falling all around me as I walk around these dark and empty streets. Can you feel me there? Can you feel it in the air? Last summer you pushed me away in the old apartment, devoid of color. I wanted you to stay. The times have changed and now all the feeling's gone. I know you are right where you belong. Can you feel me there? Can you feel it in the air? Can you feel me there? Can you feel it in the air? Times have changed and now all the feeling's gone. I know you are right where you belong. Ashes falling all around me as I walk around these dark and empty streets. Can you feel me there? Can you feel it in the air? Can you feel me there? Can you feel it in the
The places we found, the water raining down, you laid on the ground, and you made no sound. Honey, it all fades out when the storm dies down. Yeah, I need you, I need you around. I need you around. Yeah, I need you. I need you around. Need you. Need you. Need you. I know I hear this sound, 'cause you're sticking around. Now I'm feeling found. Honey, it all fades out when the storm dies down. Yeah, I need you. I need you around. I need you around. Yeah, I need you. I need you around. Honey, it all fades out when the storm dies down. Yeah, I need you. I need you. Motorcycle, I have wet dreams about you. I'll show you if you meet me underneath the light poles. Motorcycle, I have wet dreams about you. I'll show you if you meet me underneath the light poles.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this afternoon's session, and actually the final session of this two-day event, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. I'll definitely be going home at the end of today with a lot of ideas and questions that have been answered, and some questions that still need answers, but really stimulating couple of days, certainly for me. So thank you for having me on board. I just want to remind you what we've got ahead of us. We'll show you the agenda now of what's happening this afternoon. You can see that we've got some keynote presentations, really interesting. We're moving on to looking at the increasingly and ever important role of manufacturing when it comes to sustainability and net zero. Finishing off with a panel discussion, and then we should be done and hitting the road at about 3ish, but actually not hitting the road, just to let you know that we will be staying open. There's plenty of opportunity for more networking at the end of the afternoon, and then doors will be closing, I think, around 5. But to kick off this afternoon's session, we're going to be talking about a sustainable future and the role of manufacturers, of course, incredibly important for this audience, and also, of course, welcome back to those of you who are joining us remotely this afternoon. So it's my great delight to introduce Chief Engineer for Digital Manufacturing at the MTC. Please give a warm welcome to Joe Darlington.
Look a bit younger in that photo. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here again at the National Manufacturing Summit, and welcome day to day two. It's just going to take a few moments really to reflect on sort of the future of manufacturing, and perhaps provide a bit of a perspective on how we can accelerate adoption of digital manufacturing and net zero, and share some of our perhaps ambitions. I think actually today and yesterday is part of that conversation, as Daisy's already alluded to. It is about maintaining a conversation. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool engineer. Sometimes I have to remind myself it's not always a technical solution. So actually some of the wider challenges that we've got, it's quite a complex set of opportunities that are ahead of us. So if I think about some of the challenges that are facing manufacturing, I suppose like many other sectors over recent years, we've had our fair share of headwinds. So from the sort of stress test of just-in-time supply chain model that was really tested through the COVID-19 pandemic, through to the pressure of the operational pressure that manufacturing industries faced over the last 12 or 18 or so months, with the pressure created around the energy crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. So we've had our fair share of challenges. And that's also against a backdrop of our relative proportion of investment of GDP in the UK in R&D. So we're still at 1.75-ish% of GDP, against our OECD competitors are around that 2.5% mark, something like 2019, but that hasn't changed a huge amount. So we're still somewhere behind the game in terms of our relative investment in R&D. And that can be kind of further reflected in the ecosystem in terms of UK manufacturing around adoption and uptake of digital technologies and automation. We're still somewhere down the league tables in terms of our uptake of those technologies. And that's again also reflected in OECD reports in terms of how SMEs particularly access funding, the right kind of funding to enable them to compete both within Europe but also within the global markets as well. For many sectors, low carbon technologies are yet to sort of widely be available. For some, they don't exist at all. For manufacturing, and innovative technologies and real-world applications of research are needed to ensure that these low-carbon technologies are more widely available, but we need support in doing that. And that support also has to critically come from government as well, helping the manufacturing ecosystem understand what our needs are. So firstly, and I think you will have heard these messages over the course of the last couple of days, how can we be more efficient with what we currently have? Understanding not only our energy consumption, but wider sustainability footprint. That's a really challenging problem to tackle if you're an SME in our manufacturing supply base. Getting your head around what kind of consumption that you've got, but also your wider sustainability footprint is really, really challenging. And that's where networks such as MTC and the high value manufacturing network that we sit within are a really important catalyst. Then we can help industry of all sizes, from primes down to SMEs, understand also what technology is. So technology it's a means, it's not the end. Understanding how we tackle sustainability skills, moving productivity, those are the ends that we're really trying to get to. Technology is an important enabler. I suppose also on a kind of an optimistic note, we do, over the decades, have shown in manufacturing we've got a pretty good pedigree in driving innovation, being able to change and reshape ourselves. You only have to look at the response around the COVID pandemic, where UK manufacturing came together to start to tackle challenges like the ventilator challenge, and then how we survived and reshaped our supply chains to ensure that our businesses remained profitable. Reshoring manufacturing capability presents an interesting challenge, but reshoring manufacturing process is vital to help us avoid the impact of stretched global supply chains. The UK is still, I have to remind people of this, still one of the largest, the 9th largest manufacturing country in the world, are producing something like £183 billion worth of products and employing 2.5 million people. But we've got to build resilience in those supply chains and in those sectors. So reshoring manufacturing processes will allow this part of the economy to continue to expand and continue to provide high skill, high value jobs in the market. And the MTC and the high value manufacturing catapult, hopefully for some of you that are on site, and possibly for some of you remote and online, you can see some examples of the work that we do across the UK, working with business, providing facilities and tools and the skills to partner with manufacturing, to take those early steps towards new technologies such as additive manufacturing, starting to make the leap towards things like digitization. We as an ecosystem are at the service of UK manufacturing to really help drive those top technologies. So we perform that very strong translational research capability, working in conjunction with our incredibly strong academic base that we have to help to drive these technologies. And it is really important. It's both for the primes and OEMs, but critically working with the small, medium enterprises in our ecosystem. And that's ultimately what still drives me to work particularly in this space. That's really, really critical. It genuinely brings me into work with a smile on my face still every day. It's a critical role. Sustainability itself is a multifaceted problem. It's not just about net zero, but creating resilient supply chains and businesses. And the UK needs a long-term strategy for economic development and sustained growth in the manufacturing sector that builds resilience. Despite the fact that manufacturing accounts for 11% of the UK gross value add, there's been around 90,000 jobs lost to the sector since 2009. So that's why we need the right strategy in place where we can reshore high-value manufacturing industries such as electrification, around opportunities around low-carbon shipping, around carbon capture, and around green technologies without damaging our reputation as a global, outward-facing trading economy. It's vital that we're doing this work at the MTC to strengthen the links between academia and industry, and we encourage the government to embrace this agenda and prioritise the manufacturing sector as it looks to grow the UK's economy in the face of really increasing challenging headwinds. But there's opportunity in there as well. And I think this morning you will heard, and I'll reinforce the message, and it's not one that we should shy away from, but nurturing skills is really critical. So I'd like to finally just reference the need for investing in education and training that's necessary to create the right kind of skills. So in the digital manufacturing sector, supporting hybrid engineers, so where we bring manufacturing and mechanical skills together and overlay the need for those skills to become hybrid. So supporting development of digital technologies within those traditional manufacturing and mechanical skill sets. The best way to improve future outcomes for manufacturers is to ensure that this sector is equipped with those skills to deal with the challenges of tomorrow. And it's to provide the people, and we're in a facility here where that's very much an active part of what we do, to provide the people with the skills they need to develop the technology that will enable us to achieve both our tackling of our economic challenges around productivity, but also the global challenges we face around sustainability and net zero. And again, as you will have heard, the UK continues to suffer from a real skills shortage, and it's a double-edged sword when I talk about that here. So over recent years, we've seen our own challenge around some of the skills that we develop here, and we're very much, as an entity, here to build and drive skills into the workforce. So in the UK, some organisations are estimating that the cost to the economy of around £6.3 billion a year around the skills gap that we are currently facing. So to change this, we do need to be increasing our investment in skills and workforce development. And MTC and HVMC have been calling for a new skills to build programme to work in partnership with government to invest in new skills for the workforce and to increase our manufacturing capacity. Now, the curriculum really focuses on high value skills. So again, the kind of assets that we've demonstrated and shown over the last couple of days and that exist across our network are really the kind of skills that we need for the future. So I think, as we've sort of said at the outset, it's really maintaining the conversation. So it's great that we've had so many folk here over the last couple of days in person, and for colleagues that are remote, but we'd really like to kind of continue and maintain the conversation around how we build capabilities in digital manufacturing, how we understand as businesses how we're going to tackle our sustainability and net zero challenges. So I'd like to just thank you very much again for joining us over the last couple of days, and I hope that the conversation really is just going to continue from here forward. So thank you very much.
Well, Joe, thank you very much. And I know Joe will be joining me for that last panel discussion of this afternoon. So on that note, I'm going to pick up the iPad and start looking to see if we've got questions. But you do have about 40 minutes to start to send questions in for that panel session that you might want answered. Just to remind you, go onto the website nmsummit.co.uk/guide, and that will show you how and where you can send those questions in, and I'll keep an eye on them as they come in. Delighted now to move on to our next presentation of this afternoon. We're going to be talking about digital thread strategy enabling sustainable manufacturing, again in that run up to that panel where we will be discussing all things sustainability with relevance to this industry. But please give a warm welcome from PTC, Paul Brooks.
Hi, good afternoon. There's a friend always used to say to me at this particular point of the day, you've had a nice lunch, you're feeling a bit sleepy, you might get a bit tired. If you do get really tired, just try not to make too much noise. That's the only important part of it. But yeah. So yes, a focus on really this afternoon of sustainability and really how you use that, or how actually you design things, how you manufacture things, and how you use them outside in the field, thinking about that and the consideration of how that fits in. And I think this is probably something a lot of people might have done quite a while ago, but didn't really realise about it. Reduce, reuse, recycle, collect those things for Blue Peter, get all the cans, get all the pieces of newspapers. People focused on that a lot. We used to take things to the Scouts and think about how we could reuse things or make do and mend, as it was at war times, etc. People were savvy about this, switching lights off when you leave the room. That's what your parents always tell you. Shut the door, keep the heat in. So yeah, it's just a mantra and a way of thinking to ensure that, can we keep that going? Can we focus on that? But yeah, manufacturing, is it part of the ethos? Is it what you do from day to day? Do people consider these things? Hopefully they do, but then at corporate, global, large level, now people are realising, yes, this is key. It actually is something we should focus on. It's part of ESG, so environmental, social governance of what people actually choose. People even pick companies now, will pick that particular company to work for because it has got a good focus. It considers the environment, it considers what it can do socially, and it considers how we fit in with all the different aspects. So young people now, the Generation Zs or the Generation Ys, millennials, all these different aspects, it's part of the day-to-day thinking of what it does and how it impacts. And yeah, that then being, well, how do we focus on it? How do we see where to look? And how do we understand where to make those choices in manufacturing? And consumers themselves pick things or pick products that have been manufactured in the right way. Obviously, we heard about net zero, or we make sure that we've got the right carbon footprint. But how do we make the decisions and the understanding of how to make the right choices? And those are on that C-level agenda of how do we reduce or have reduction targets. So it might want to be less emissions, less waste, less things which aren't acceptable. And that might be part of that global strategy. It might be in the actual annual report. And it's something that they are self-assessing or assessed by a governmental level of what to do with that. And the investors themselves, if somebody's going to invest in a particular global corporation, well, I want to know that I'm making the right decision. It's not going to cause conflict. It's not against a particular political agenda, or it's not against some sort of a social aspect. How do we decide how to focus, what to do? So all these parts then become KPIs, metrics, and things that drive people at that top level of what to do. And ultimately, yes, improve margins as well. Less waste, more productivity, more availability, better performance means you sweat the assets, you make use of those particular parts of production and get the best out of them. So the more that you turn those lights on or those machines on and they're making something, then you're not wasting energy and not wasting a particular resource. And I wasn't really from this background. I think I mentioned yesterday, I come from systems engineering. I studied systems engineering at University of Sheffield 20 plus years ago now, and somebody said, how about this? It has all these different parts of technology. But I think we did focus on these things, but it wasn't high on the agenda. It wasn't something that you particularly said, yes, we're doing this for making sure that we have this circular economy. So the circular economy being as little waste as possible. It remains to be reused, recycled, or redesigned, or becomes part of something that is, how do we engineer it in the right way? So I'd like to go through those various parts of engineering, design, manufacturing, and service, and the areas where that could be something to gain that benefit in those particular aspects. And that being, when we design it, is it going to function correctly for the particular user? Is it human-centric? Has it all the aspects that they're expecting? If it doesn't do all those various parts, then something might be added on later, something might be designed in a different way. Does it interact with those particular things that it might need to be? Does it have the right subcomponents, the right aspects of, can we change the battery on it? Can we advance something that we want to change the screen in the future? And you notice there's been trends over times of, yes, or that particular phone as it's designed at the moment is locked together, it's proprietary, we can't change that battery, we can't look after it in the future, we can't reuse it. All those those phones end up in the bin, all those chargers end up in the bin, and all those particular cables that you've got thousands of in your drawer all sit there because each proprietary cable is for each particular device. So that design then being, how do we make sure that we consider all these various aspects to be future-proof and utilised and a standard or an acceptable cross-functional purpose to do multiple things. So hopefully people are considering that more, and even when it comes to things like Apple are being told, can we make sure we don't have your bespoke proprietary adapter anymore with the lightning cable, can you do it as a USB-C? So that also rethinking the business model and the product or the service, and how do we drive that as well? So when the actual particular asset is in the field, how do we ensure that the customer is utilising it as much as possible? It isn't just sat on the shelf, or it isn't being considered to do all the necessary things it needs to do. How do you make sure you get the feedback from the design of, this is exactly what you want, this is what's missing, and this is how we ensure that all those parts of the process are fulfilled? And the manufacturing as well. Obviously, when you've designed that product and you've made sure that you've got the right total available market, it's what everybody desires. But how do you sustainably do that? And as I mentioned before, get the best performance out of those particular products. You don't want waste. You don't want it to develop something that's problematic. I speak to companies around the world. So my role within PTC is to go to particular sites, understand what their problems are, how technology can solve those. And a lot of the time it's to make sure that people do the right thing, have the right decisions. And if it doesn't go wrong and start to cascade into issues, those issues being that maybe some waste is created. That waste has to be disposed of. That waste might be something that is various emissions, or it has different problems because it's chemical or it's toxic, wherever it may be. But that's multiple impact on that production facility itself. It's a loss of production, so there's downtime to fix it. There's the disposal of those particular problems and products. And it needs to be then considered, well, how do we train people or understand when something is going to go wrong? How do we get the information to catch it before it goes wrong? And how do we get somebody to improve upon that? So these dashboards that are created do enable people to make decisions and have an understanding of what's happening, how it's happening, and how we ensure that we always have that same level of correct performance or right performance. We have a good day, and how do we get that to be repeated? And that then becomes, as I mentioned, that if you're producing as efficiently as possible, that overall equipment effectiveness of the efficiency of the right availability, right performance, and right quality, are you getting the maximised output? You're utilising that plant as effective as possible. And less pollution, less emissions, less waste. Well, that would be, I used to work for GE for 10 years. If things start to go outside of that envelope of acceptable operation, it starts to get towards something that's wrong. Catch it before that causes a problem. It might be flammable, it might be explosive. You don't want to do that, so you understand what's going on. We work with the water authorities at the moment as well. Obviously, it's in the headlines quite frequently. Pollution, unacceptable levels of overflow, rainwater or excess water, which contains various parts of unacceptable waste within it. How do you make sure that you see that there's variations of that water table, the water levels, and view or visualize what to do with it or how to do it and do it appropriately with under right regulation? So that is really gaining that insight and view of what needs to be done. Then when things are out in the field, well, there's parts of when we see people developing or creating or implementing, you don't want somebody to design all these things, manufacture it, and it take a long time to create it, a long time to set it up, lots of travel backwards and forwards, lots of trying to make sure it's done the right way, people going to a particular site to do something without the right tools, the right knowledge, the right skills. How do you make sure that they go with all that cross-skilled, that multi-purpose, that greater insight of what to do and how to do it? So we've worked with these field services people. I think I mentioned the other day of things specific like medical devices, medical scanners, things like in the water authorities. When somebody goes to that site, to have the right mechanisms and understanding of what to do and how to get it to be done the right way. And again, back to connecting to those devices that are out in the field. Is it sat there doing nothing? Is it not working the correct way? Is it just using energy because it's just left with the lights on, basically? And understanding then how to get the maximisation of that and get that product used as fulfilled as much as possible. And that's just really then insight of what to do and how to do that. But back to the design part, when we create these things and we have all these various variations of instruction of how to work upon it, how to have developments, can we reuse elements of that? Can we reuse the skill set and ensure that people can have that first time fix rate, that mean time between repair and failure to ensure that they get these things back online as quickly as possible? Water authorities, things when it is to ensure things are done the correct way, might be that for a certain amount of time, whilst it's in the field, things are going wrong, wrong emissions, wrong pollution, wrong use of energy, that you need to make sure that you've got that information to make those right choices, to make those right decisions. So as I started to look at this as my old engineering eye of being more efficient, make the best of the product you create, sustainability is part of probably what we live and breathe. It's got a different label to it, it's said in a different way, but well-engineered solutions and a good understanding of things working as efficiently and effectively and designed fit for purpose is ensuring that all these things are ticked in the right way and you've produced in the right way to make use of it to the best advantage. Then we come to another aspect, and I think this is something that is another consideration, and it's probably varied as we've become to work from home more and we actually do lots of things remotely. The added benefits of allowing people to market things, market actual facilities like MTC itself, so lots of people are online at the moment to gain that knowledge and gain that understanding. They don't have to travel here anymore. We don't have to physically use that carbon footprint or that carbon value to get to this facility to share the knowledge and share the understanding. It's the same when products are created. So we had a display outside for a pump from Howden. That allows customers to see the functionality, how it works, the intricacies of their variation of design, their specification, without actually needing to move that product around. That product is worth tens of thousands. We work with other companies where their products are worth hundreds of thousands. And to ship people from one place to another costs money, it costs time, and all that elements that go with that. So enabling people to see as much to make those better decisions actually cuts those costs and cuts that energy usage and the environmental impact. And that can develop to all sorts of different levels. As I mentioned, it allows people to see, what does my car look like in the garage? What does this particular asset look like in this production facility? What does it look like with the variations? Can I train people to have lots more understanding of how to fix it with all this various augmented design and understanding? And that just really becomes then, we don't even need a showroom. We don't need a physical property to house this, keep those cars in, keep those particular assets on, keep the lights on, keep the displays, keep the air conditioning, all those elements of it start to be, well, actually, people are quite happy to get information that gives them all that understanding without having to get there physically. I do believe that, yes, that's a possibility, but being actually in my mid-40s, so yes, physically, tangibly looking at stuff, I still probably like to go to a car showroom and get a brochure to understand and flick through things quickly. So there's something in between. There's something in between of satisfying what the actual people need and how they get that knowledge and get that that feeling and that sort of touch points of being part of it. There's a halfway house between that of trying to do that. But it's developing rapidly that people can get a whole user experience of something before they've even seen it or even seen it physically. That then goes to the point of PTC actually work within PLM and design of products such as clothing. So now we can see what our clothing looks like, what it can actually look on somebody without it even existing. So you can buy stuff that's then created because people and the demand and the necessity is created from just the advertising on the website, etc. Then it's created in some other part of the world or wherever it may be. So things do rapidly change, and that mindset of how do I expose myself to a lot more people over a lot broader area then becomes available from this consideration of variation aspect. So what do we do as PTC? Well, if you ever have the advantage or the ability to go to a PTC office, our main office is in Boston, in Seaport. We actually have an event called LiveWorks. It's one of the most popular events globally to show IoT, CAD, PLM, all those things that we've mentioned over time of what PTC is the experts within. And it's 5,000 to 6,000 people that physically go to this particular event. Our facility there, yes, we're considerate. We make sure that what we use and the premises that we're in have this as a focus. So that focus is with everybody in the design of buildings themselves. Back to the middle part, the more understanding, the better visualization, how you make decisions, you can then understand what you need to do or how you can do it to improve or reduce those particular energy costs or usage that you may have. So back to that smart meter that sits at your home, the more you have understanding of your building management system or your factories or production, you can make those decisions. And then focusing on actually making sure we have the right impacts and that we make some right decisions and promoting the use of all this remote technology to communicate with each other. So on larger scales, we work with ports to get an understanding of what's actually in the port at the moment, how much downtime there is, how they can reduce their energy consumption, help people to produce things such as solar panels as effectively as possible, make that production, develop them and produce them with as little impact on losses in production, and understanding how to do it, those variations of mechanisms, the operating procedures, make sure when something does change, they've got the most current version of how to do that. And things such as working with HP, and I think this is a synergy with lots of different assets that are in the field. When people used to work on particular things, as it might be an office to fix a printer, such as HP, or it might be these things that I mentioned as a medical device, they would take lever arch files of PDFs or printouts, and they try to make sure that they had the particular one. Even sometimes vans would be full of documentation to help them with instruction of what to do. Now, HP had a directive to try and reduce their paper-based instruction and have all of this using PTC technology to have all that work instruction housed in the right way with product lifecycle management, and also to understand how the right instruction to guide somebody at the right time of what to do. So that enables people to also be multi-skilled. They can have the information as new variants and new changes of those products actually happen. And that means you to be agile and adaptive to create those products and vary for the workplace. So back to where we were yesterday, as I mentioned, this digital thread. So that connected product enables you to have service optimization. You then can understand, is it performing? Is it being utilized as much as possible? Can we maximize actual financial gain from that as well? Can we design it in connected engineering by making sure that this is what the actual need is within the market? These are the various add-ons and various changes and various developments actually what are needed. This is the possibility of future-proofing it as the subsystems or sub-assemblies that might become part of that. And whilst we do manufacture it, do we utilize our production facility, our energy, our usage as much as possible by gaining an understanding of what we're doing right now and what could we do better? And if something is going to go wrong, let's catch it before it causes some sort of issue and problems in the future. So that bit again really of this closed loop or this circular economy that goes around it of being, let's design it effectively and understanding as much as possible. When it's out in the field, let's understand how it's performing, how we can improve it, what needs to be reviewed, how can we redesign it, how can we make sure that people get what they want from it, or it gets the end result that's desired from it. And then also when it becomes that end of life, how do we use the recycled materials that can be then become part of something else? Or then how can we dispose of it in the most appropriate way? And that can be things like, and I remember researching this, of even mobile phones. So I mentioned mobile phones, yes, we've got lots in the bin, but then could you start using that mobile phone for a device as a camera in a room to monitor something? Or how do we reapply these things? It's all these drawers of cables and boxes full of old IT. How do we reuse that or do something with it on an industrial scale that we could possibly do something that's more advantageous? Thank you for that, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. And if it's even one small step into emptying some of those drawers full of old phones and cables, I personally would be extremely grateful. And actually, just things like when you were saying there, can you reuse, an old mobile phone and turn it into a CCTV camera, or a Ring type camera? I mean, it just makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And that's just a small example of the much, much bigger global problem and issue we're all facing, but something I'm sure that will come up in the panel discussion. We're going to move on now to Scotland's role in all of this issue, the need for more sustainable manufacturing. Delighted to welcome to the stage the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland's CEO. He was UKRI Made Smarter Innovation Challenge Director for 2 years, leading that nearly £150 million UK innovation project, and as I said, is going to talk about Scotland's role in all this. Please give Chris Courtney a warm welcome.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you all, you're very kind. The disadvantage of joining a presentation just before this is you realise there's a lot of commonality between what you've just heard and what I'm going to tell you, so I'll accelerate through the bits that are similar and try and focus on some new things I'd like to introduce. So just a quick introduction to me. So I took over as the Chief Executive of the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland on the 1st of November. As Daisy mentioned before that, I was involved in digital manufacturing across UKRI and a sort of national innovation programme. And before that, I spent the vast majority of my career in industry. So an interesting mix of government, universities, industry sort of background to it. The picture on the right-hand side, which is a cartoon, is actually no longer a cartoon. It's a real building that's just opened. And it's the new facility as part of the NMIS group and as part of a nearly £90 million investment from the Scottish Government in advanced manufacturing and digitalisation. And actually, what we want to try and do in that specific building speaks to the heart of this agenda. You've probably heard it said multiple times in the last couple of days, if you think about manufacturing and all the products that you design, make, use, reuse, and all of the issues I just heard the tail end of, if you're going to achieve net zero across all of those sectors by 2040 or 2050, the speed of transformation is enormous across all sectors. The opportunities that presents are significant, but the threats clearly too. Net zero, electrification, Tony will touch on that shortly, digitalization, skills agenda, and it's across all sectors. I'm not entirely sure what my aircraft of the future is going to look like in 20 years, what fuel is going to be fueled by, what the engine and the propulsion system looks like. I don't know what my medicines are quite going to look like. In order to achieve that, there needs to be a pretty radical shift. And it's not just about certain areas. It's not just about electric vehicles and automotive. It also applies in pharmaceuticals, food, constructions, as I said. My position is you need to take a systems approach across that, because the total transformation needed to deliver net zero, as an example, is really quite significant, not just because it's multi-sector, but because of all the other things you have to put in place in order to achieve it. You need to create a sort of connected ecosystem, and we play our part in that, and I'll explain what that looks like. And it is about sort of forming new and novel collaborations across sectors, across science, across industry, internationally, and so on. From a Scottish purely perspective, we've got some of the right ingredients for some of that solution, not all of them, not always in the right amount in the right places, and it's the same in the UK. We need to make net zero products and have a net zero production system for pretty much everything. So it's creating zero emissions vessels, vehicles, and so on, and moving towards autonomy in transport. It's also about renewable energy, nuclear, offshore wind, hydrogen, and many others. It's also about how we build and heat our homes. But all of those things, they themselves need to be made in a net zero way, which is part of the exciting challenge. In addition to that, we have to find a way sustainably to feed 8 billion people, 1.5 billion more than there were 15 years ago. If you look at the chemical usage in the pharmaceutical sector, just in the clinical trials phase, it's pretty extensive. So some of the really advanced medicines are pretty ineffective from a sustainability point of view, simply having enough of that chemical in the world to make it at scale. And then textiles, whether it's fast fashion or up into composites and other things, how do you create that sort of much more circular type economy in those areas? And construction, the number of new plants, retrofit to homes and so on that we're going to need across the whole nation is a significant opportunity, I think, for us. You have to do all of that transformation in pretty turbulent times. I think we're probably at the peak of turbulence in terms of wars, Brexit, COVID, and everything else, and all the disruptions we've all experienced, and many manufacturers have really suffered with some of those challenges, but that's likely to be an ongoing reality for many. From a manufacturing point of view, Scotland has a range, there's a long list of them, but they're kind of the ones really to kind of highlight. There's always areas around renewables and marine, so the top three. There is a committed programme from the Scottish Government or the Crown Estates there, ScotWind, which is a £30 billion investment in offshore wind, creating nearly 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. It's about 1,800 turbines to be designed, made, serviced, reused. Why couldn't we do those in the UK, in Scotland? Maritime and marine, particularly more on the defence side, from a maritime point of view, recent announcements mean that there is a significant order book, significant capability across free ports and existing shipyards across Scotland, but also the tidal system. So the biggest tidal test array, the biggest planned array, and so on, is actually in Scotland, harnessing the sort of natural resource that Scotland has, plus that large-scale engineering experience that it has. Likewise, hydrogen is pretty close. It really comes in tandem a lot with offshore wind, but also the oil and gas sector in Aberdeen. Significant opportunities for growth there, not just for all the way through from the original production through to its use in automotive, domestic heating, if anybody does that, or other modes of transport, all the way through that sort of full hydrogen economy. There's significant opportunities in Scotland for that. Green heat, one of the things I didn't know before I took the role is there is actually a designer, at least, of heat pumps in Scotland. I didn't know that till I arrived, and you probably didn't either. But the vast majority of those get exported. So if we are to transform the heating of our homes and facilities and so on, and heat pumps is a big part of that answer, then there's an opportunity to manufacture those at scale. And again, space. Space is a small and growing sector. It's got some real strengths, particularly coming out of the universities in the Central Belt, but with the launch pads in the north, you're seeing some really interesting vibrance from sort of cube satellites and in around Glasgow being the biggest manufacturer of those, to launch vehicles and launch sites and so on. So there's some interesting developments in the space sector. I could go on. I didn't mention medicines. I didn't mention a whole bunch of other things, but there's a range of opportunities which are very much here and now in Scotland. If I then think about the sort of digitalization piece of that, so certainly in my previous life, the thing to remember is it's not just a tool to help manufacturing. That's really massively important, but it's an opportunity of its own. So that if you look at digital manufacturing as a sector as much as you can, it's a quite hard thing to define. It is growing pretty quickly. And UK has a surprisingly good capability in a couple of areas, so artificial intelligence and robotics and autonomous systems. If you look at the amount of research, you look at the new ventures getting set up, you look at the investment into that space, globally it's quite competitive. If you filter on some of those, particularly AI for manufacturing applications, it drops quite significantly. So we have inherent technology capabilities in the UK that really could be put to use in the manufacturing sector. And it applies to the previous speaker all the way through the life cycle, from optimizing designs and finding new novel materials that will extend life and are much more reusable, to develop much more complex systems and products, whether it's creating smart and connected factories, connected supply chains with full end-to-end visibility of it, delivering traceability and resilience ultimately, and to be able to manage that full life cycle, understanding health of every asset, where it is and how much of it can be reused, is a big part where digitalization can play. And I think it really speaks to one of the last slides of the previous speaker. Scotland itself has a fast-growing technology sector. It's growing at about 30% per annum. The tech investment generally is growing quicker than 30%. And there's a few little sort of hot spots where we have things like the data labs in Edinburgh, which is really focused on AI broadly across the piece. There's National Centre for 5G, there's National Centres for IoT. And in Heriot-Watt, we also host the National Robotarium, so the UK's national facility in robotics. So there is some sort of capability there, and those organisations and those capabilities can be put to use in manufacturing, and we'll feel the manufacturing benefit of that. But those companies themselves can grow, develop solutions, and export around the world. People and skills. So I think I've spent most of my last day and a half in meetings where we end up talking about skills. The skills really is a choke on growth. The best way to resolve some of your growth problems is to make sure we have the right pipeline of skills across the sector. There are pockets where actually there are more jobs available than there are people to fill them, and there's problems the other way around too, where people get jobs that are very, very heavily applied to. So I was speaking to somebody yesterday who had 5 roles and had 340 applicants, and the person next to them had 5 roles and got 3 applicants. So it's quite an interesting challenge across the full sector. In part, skill shortages are a good thing because it's a sign that you've created opportunities that we can't yet meet. So if we're short of quantum skills, and no doubt we are, it's because it's a sign that we've created jobs that there isn't yet the supply of. But equally, in some areas, it's just a choke on growth, and we should look at that again and try and think about how do we reskill, upskill the existing population. If I'm right, then we have to deliver net zero in the next 15 years or so. That means those people are in the workforce now. And so educating people in schools and colleges is really, really important, but it's not going to get us there. And we need to think about harnessing the talents of people who are already in the workplace. Not just about unretiring them, as per the recent budget, but just generally looking to sort of harness that talent and draw people back into the sector. Reports have suggested that the average UK worker ceases any education at around 40, so my time has passed. And I think it's important to recognise there is untapped potential in people in that age group. Scotland itself actually produces a really high number of graduates per head of population. The challenge is keeping them there, keeping them in the sector and keeping them in Scotland, and I'm sure it's the same in other regions in the UK. So we do the ecosystem thing. Every HVMC centre would say something similar because it's important to the overall model. We work extensively with well-known companies, so it's the industry piece for us. That means over just about 100 manufacturers are formally signed up to be members. Technology providers, large and small, manufacturers, large and small. We connect directly into the academic network across Scotland. I've just come from meetings with the rest of my HVMC colleagues, and we try and connect into that UK innovation ecosystem. But if you want to move a lot of these significant transformations forward, you also need to have the right partnerships with governments, regulators, and so on. And that's also a key part of what we do. From a Scottish perspective, when I have my Team Scotland shirt on, I'm part of the collection of agencies and the Scottish Government activity around things like offshore wind or other bigger opportunities for manufacturing, and really trying to pull all of that together. And it's an important way in which we need to advance the agenda that we're talking about and harness the future of manufacturing. Growing innovation ecosystem. So there's a different slide that Scottish Government used, which is called the Year of Openings. And it's because, at least at the time when they wrote the chart, all 3 of these things were going to open in 2022. So significant to the Robotarium, top left. It is the UK Centre for Robotics and Autonomous Systems. It's hosted in Edinburgh by Heriot-Watt University, chaired by, Chief Executive Stuart Miller, ex-CTO from Innovate UK, previously at Leonardo. The Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, so really to try and drive forward re-securing the medicines manufacturing supply chain in the UK. So again, a partnership with CPI, ourselves and the University of Strathclyde, Scottish Enterprise, and the industry partners, of course. And that opened in November as well. That's literally just across the road from myself, quite literally. And as part of the INMIS group, as opposed to just the one building, we've got specialist centres dotted around this picture. Without taking you through the map, we're right beside the MMIC. We got a new anchor facility, which the team literally moved into on Monday. And so it's really trying to create a sort of a set of innovation infrastructure and assets that we can use to try and take us forward. Without telling you everything what we do, what we try to combine is digitalization, sustainability, and manufacturing type processes and skills, and really to work at the intersection of those three. So we have aspects of each of those. We do advanced forming and forging of metals. We do composites and composite recycling. We have a big push on digitalization through the life cycle as we describe, both in process industries and discrete industries. But we also have a skills academy. And those things, our intention is not to have those as 5 individual things. It's really how do we bring all those together. Most organizations that we support have a mixture of all of those problems. They don't want to just forge, but they also have digital issues and they have skills issues. And it's the same with every other company that we come across. It's really about how do we bring all of those things together and take a more integrated approach, even within what we deliver. So I just kind of leave you with thoughts that all sectors are transforming. It is actually happening. It's not something that we wish would happen. It is happening. Whether it's happening at enough pace is going to be an issue. It's going to be driven by some pretty fundamental drivers. And it will create significant opportunities. We'll need to think about new businesses, new business models, and sort of displacement of some activities. If we're going to deliver, for example, the offshore wind opportunity, there isn't actually a significant supply chain to provide those goods and services. We need to create those new businesses. If we wanted to recycle wind turbine blades, of which about 750,000 tons will go into the earth, unless we can work out how to recycle them, you need the industries that actually can do that. So we've got some of the technology, but actually growing industry is going to be a real challenge. I think we'll need a net systems approach. I doubt that Tony or any others will say something very different in terms of the approach we should try and take. I do think it's important to remember upskilling and reskilling and how do we sort of combine the different aspects I said in the triple helix. Scotland has significant opportunities. It doesn't have all of the answers, despite what people might want to say. There is, like in the rest of the UK, a world-class research and innovation infrastructure. There is significant opportunities located in Scotland, and there is some existing industrial strengths to build on. Clearly, from my point of view, a responsibility to deliver impact in Scotland, but to play a strong part in delivering those opportunities across the UK as well. And I look forward to doing that. And with that, I shall hand over to Tony.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Spot on time. I'm very impressed this afternoon. It makes my job a lot easier. And obviously, again, a lot of questions and things to discuss. In fact, the last slide where you showed the pie charts with the 3 areas, digital, skills and sustainability, that could pretty much have summed up the entire 2 days that we've been discussing those 3 issues and really trying to come up with some answers to some of those questions and problems. As Chris said, we are now going to hand over to the Challenge Director of the Faraday Battery Challenge from Innovate UK, Tony Harper. So please give Tony a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to have a canter now through cars, batteries, decarbonisation, bit of digitisation, reshoring, skills. So we shall start with the imperative, and there's some sort of news just in around all this. So this is sort of the why a little bit around the challenge that we have around the decarbonisation of transport, particularly road transport. So transportation is about 24% of the UK emissions. Road transport is the vast majority of that. The Committee for Climate Change has been in the news the last couple of days, and the colourful swish there is actually the Committee for Climate Change transition curves for what we need in terms of the reduction of emissions from the fleet in the UK. Now, bearing in mind a couple of things. One is that's the fleet. That's the on road. It's not what's sold in showrooms. And also bear in mind that 80% of the vehicles that appear on our roads are imported, just as we export 80% of what we make. But the contemporary news really is about the lines and the regs. So I think today it was confirmed that we will stick to the 2035 zero emission sort of mandate. So all cars and vans sold new from 2035 will need to be zero emissions, and at 2030 there is a waypoint that says that any vehicle sold or any car and van sold at that point will need to have a significant zero emission range. The other new news was that the ZEV mandate, which basically puts in some points at a little bit ahead of that, 2028, I think, which is basically just try and stop that curve being a hockey stick or an inverse hockey stick, were also announced today as well. So that's the challenge in terms of the fleet. If you then think about what that means for industry, and in particular what it means for batteries in industry, then you get a picture that's a little bit like this. Hopefully it's not all too washed out. But as Chris said, this transformation is happening quickly. And this chart is supposed to show you just about how big and how quick from the point of view of batteries. So this is about battery demand in car and van factories in the UK. So today we have about a 4 gigawatt hour a year demand for likes of Nissan Leafs and some plug-in hybrids and so on that we make today. And we have a capacity of 2 gigawatt hours of production, and that's the AESC plant in Sunderland. In 6 and a bit years' time, that moves to 100 gigawatt hours of demand. And that's not just sort of us making it up or even consultants looking at the numbers. We do all that, actually, but then we go and ask the car manufacturers, directors of purchasing, what they're actually going to buy, and the numbers correlate. And by the way, that 100 gigawatts doubles by 2040. Yeah, so it is an extremely and by the way, that doesn't include stationary storage or heavy goods or off highway or aviation. We do have, the good news is we do have a gigafactory under construction in Sunderland at the moment. So people often talk about that as being the expansion to the current one. It isn't. It's a new factory on a new site, albeit very close to the old factory. And that gives us an initial 11 gigawatt hours of capacity plus a potential expansion to 40. Clearly, the loss of British Volt was a disappointing bit of rubbing out we had to do on this chart in terms of planned capacity. But there are further plans and further propositions that start to colour in that chart somewhat more. But as you can see, the challenge is significant. The challenge/stroke opportunity is significant. So people then often say, "Oh yeah, well that's all very well and good, but aren't these just going to be commodities that are imported from China? You know, why do we bother about all of this?" So coming up is a narrative about why they're not going. Why they're not going to come from China, and I've got a later slide that shows why they're not commodities. So all around the world at the moment, there is, as well as the transition and the mandates for zero emission vehicles, there are significant regulation and incentive programs for reshoring and resilience. Many of you will have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act in the in the US, I wish it was in the UK, but in the US, which is essentially about $370 billion of incentives for growing a homegrown industry around green technologies. The more relevant one to us is the rules of origin requirements between ourselves and the European Union. This is part of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Essentially, it says that if we wish to exchange vehicles or sell vehicles tariff-free between the United Kingdom and the European Union, then 65% of the battery content will need to be, value of the battery will need to be originating either in the United Kingdom or the European Union. And you might say, okay, well, yeah, well, what's 65%? Well, 65%, this is reasonably complicated slide, but essentially this slide says that if you accept that the materials are going to be dug out of the ground and primarily processed, probably somewhere else, and maybe the other materials, which is cans and separators and that kind of thing, could come from anywhere. Just about everything else will need to be done either here or the European Union. Yeah. So secondary processing, anode, cathode, gigafactory, pack assembly, the works. Okay. So that's why, and also as well as the regulation, this is about a 10 billion at least industry a year. So we need to capture the value of it as well. So why the need for government intervention? Why do I exist? Why does my now £541 million programme exist? It's fundamentally for these two reasons simultaneously. It's to ensure that the UK automotive industry and other industries meets its net zero commitments in the required timeframe. And we highlight that in the required timeframe because that is the real challenge. If we had 100 years to do this, it would be fine. But we need to do this extremely quickly. And also, we need to make sure that we prosper from that transition, and we do so in a just and fair way right across the United Kingdom. So what do we need to do to ensure those things? Well, the Automotive Council, which is a government industry body which looks at what's needed to support the transition, identified 4 simple priorities. One is to support the OEM platform transition activities, essentially synchronizing the replacements of vehicles so they can be EVs at a certain point in time drives a big pile-up of investment within the OEMs. But we also clearly need to embed the EV supply chain, not just batteries, in the UK. And also we need to accept that there's an awful lot to go in terms of research and innovation for performance, for cost, for weight, for recyclability and all sorts. And then also the 4th point is that we need to recognize, as others have done, I think previously, that just shifting to electrification or any technology puts you on a road to complete decarbonisation, but it doesn't get you to complete decarbonisation on day one. And therefore we need to innovate to drive towards net zero through the value chain and right through life. So what does that mean in terms of what we do for batteries in the Faraday Battery Challenge? We take a reasonably simple triple track approach. We support the deployment at scale of those technologies that are ready. We support the development of those technologies that are not yet ready, and we support the research into solutions of problems of decarbonisation that we have yet to solve. And in case the other speakers haven't said it enough, we also need to develop a skilled and productive workforce. Okay, right. So this is the. They're not going to be a commodities slide. So bear with me a little bit. But we did an awful lot of work, an analysis with the industry over the last couple of years to work out what products we actually are going to make as a country in 2030, and what batteries will they need to support those products. It was on the hypothesis actually that it isn't a one size fits all or a one battery fits all, and it turns out that the requirements are quite diverse. This is just a chart of pack level energy density. So you've got volumetric energy density along the bottom. So how many watt hours in a litre of space do you need? And then on the y-axis is the gravimetric energy density. So how many watt hours per kilogram? And if you look at the various products that we make in the UK, so we make urban utilities, we make high volume cars, we make sports and performance cars, we make large Bentleys and Range Rovers, and we also make supercars. They all have very different requirements, and we've got quite a diverse automotive industry in the UK. And then when you start to overlay some of the common chemistries over that, then it turns out actually that, and you're seeing this in the marketplace, by the way, that some iron-based chemistry, so that's lithium iron phosphate, LFP, can actually cover quite a significant amount of the high volume market. The high nickels can cover that and the sports cars and a fair amount of the large SUVs and so on. But it also shows that for some of that requirement and for supercars, actually we're going to need some batteries and some solutions that are not yet there yet. There's roadmaps to get there. So lithium sulfur batteries, for example, in principle can cover the supercar territory. Solid state batteries are likely to have an entry point because they're going to be more expensive to start with in the large and luxury areas. But it also shows that that's an automotive picture, but it also shows where the overlays are with other potential markets as well, particularly static storage and all-electric flight. So not commodities, and I haven't even started to talk about formats. This is just chemistry. If you think about cylindricals, pouches, prismatics, none of that is converging either. So not commodities and probably not going to come from China. So out of all of that analysis, we boil down this into some specific battery big plays that we're supporting. The first 4 of those are literally direct conclusions from the chart I've just shown you, but 5 and 6 are the other things that we clearly need to do, and 5 is around a sustainable UK battery industry, sustainable in all of the definitions, so total end-to-end life cycle, use of earth-abundant materials, manufacturing energy reduction. It's in small print there, but it's a huge thing for us, particularly in the UK context, and something I would encourage folks to take away from this discussion today. But also, complete recycling and circularity. And then bringing it to some of the discussions that we're having in this summit. We've also identified what we call the 5 dimensions of digital, which I will expand upon shortly. So, as I said, the Faraday Battery Challenge is a £541 million investment over 8 years. And if we draw a very simplistic ecosystem that goes all the way from lab to factory, in the UK, we have an ecosystem that goes all the way from lab to factory. The Faraday Battery Challenge covers the investment in research, the promotion of scaling of high-tech businesses, the provision of large-scale national infrastructure for battery manufacture, such as the UK BIC, but it's also complemented by late-stage R&D through the Advanced Propulsion Centre, and also the incentive programme for large-scale industrial investment in factories, essentially provided by the Automotive Transformation Fund, and we operate this together as one lab to factory ecosystem. So a little bit, I'm running out of time here, but a little bit of insight into the priorities that we have for those research problems, scientific problems that are yet to be solved. I won't go through each of them, but I would point out actually that the beyond lithium-ion areas, this is a little bit typical for the UK, I guess, is areas where we have global strengths. So over the period we've been investing in the Faraday Institution, we've got to what I would call true science superpower on most subjects actually, but particularly I'd say solid state sodium ion and lithium sulfur batteries. On the mid TRL scale up stuff, I won't go into detail, but to strike a more optimistic note potentially than this afternoon. If you look, we've just had some work done by a company called Deal Room, looking at the effect of the challenge and some of the regulation, and we now have a tech startup ecosystem in the UK that's valued at 2.7 billion. It's the second highest enterprise value for a battery tech startup ecosystem in Europe, third largest globally. 50% of that value has been created since 2015. Yeah, so we know we can have a big effect, and then a little bit on the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. Again, I guess you can read it faster than I can say it, but it is an open access gigafactory scale in terms of scale and pace of the equipment development centre just down the road by Coventry Airport. And lastly, I will touch on those, because of the subject of this summit, I will touch on those 5 dimensions of digital. So very quickly, big data and AI for materials discovery. If you walk into any university lab that's trying to develop new batteries, it's essentially a materials discovery exercise. I spoke to one CEO of a materials startup the other day, and he said, we've tried mixing our material with just about every other element in the periodic table. But using deep neural networks to log and teach deep neural networks what works, and more importantly, what doesn't work, to do that across hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even millions of data points, is a really powerful way to aid future materials discovery. Test and field data analytics, the words don't really cover it there, but there's an awful lot of data out there in test rigs, but also importantly on cars, where again we can harness that data, we can use machine learning on that data, we can feed the conclusions back into real-time battery management systems. So if any of you have ever had have an EV and have had an over-the-air update which increases the range, I promise you that over-the-air update did not change the battery. What it did was it changed the software that controls the battery and the parameters that control the battery, and that will have been, and its ability to do so will have been based on machine learning from large-scale analytics. Digital design and optimization and performance verification, that might be what you sort of traditionally call engineering digital twins. But again, there's a lot of new science in there, a lot of new physics, different and new challenges. So we're seeing a lot of companies that are active in that space. Others have touched on it as well. We call it digitization for provenance and state. So this is being able to walk up to a battery at the end of life, know where it came from, know what's in it, maybe have some instructions about how to dismantle it. And know where all the bits and pieces came from, and you maybe read in the news around developments around battery passporting. That's what all of that is about. And then importantly, digitization of the end-to-end bill of process, and things. For example, things can go very wrong very quickly in a battery factory. Understanding the critical characteristics in your bill of process and the critical characteristics of your input materials, being able to monitor them, track them, debug things when things go wrong, and again have a learning factory that does that. Again, very, very, very important. So that's a quick canter in slightly over time through batteries, reshoring, net zero, digitization, and a few other points in between. So thank you very much.
Well, Tony, thank you. I'm now going to invite my 3 panelists to come and take a bucket chair, and we will. I'll have a look at the questions that have come in. You can see that on the board there, I've got 4 speakers, but actually Paul, who we've heard from twice in the last couple of days, did have to rush off. So apologies, we didn't have time to change the slide there. But we have plenty to discuss. And thank you to those of you who have already sent questions in. I will have a look at it. And also, of course, welcome to Marie Wells, who's Head of Sustainability Manufacturing Technology Centre, MTC, of course. Welcome to you all, and thank you for the presentations. Marie, it makes sense for me to come straight to you and just maybe reflect on what you've been hearing, both in these immediate sessions, but also over the course of the last couple of days, and whether this leaves you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I'm quite pleased that the sustainability narrative has run through all of this, and I 100% agree that having a resilient workforce that understands what they need to do for that is going to be a key part of that. I was quite interested with the last speaker around the batteries and whether that is a place for us to play, and I personally think there's the reshoring bit, which he talked about with resilience. There's also greenshoring. If we are decarbonised and we're the right place to bring things, then actually that gives us export opportunities because we bring other countries' Scope 3 emissions down. So I think all of that is really quite exciting.
Very good. And I wonder if there's a Scottish angle or a Scottish reaction to the batteries presentation. I mean, I have to say, I found it fascinating, and a lot of it was quite new to me, because obviously as a journalist, you know that batteries is a big controversial issue at the moment. There's so much politics involved, but actually to see some of those slightly more positive, saying that we're second in Europe and third in the world, that was something that I wasn't aware of on that area, because you hear so much of the doom and gloom about batteries. It's not happening. So it was nice to hear some of the positive angles.
Yeah, and it is, and I think one of Tony's charts that showed there are opportunities across the range of different battery chemistries, shapes, sizes, and so on. And you do see some of that. So even from a Scottish perspective, we're seeing interest in more batteries which are in the bottom left-hand corner than the top right-hand side. So there are opportunities across the UK, I think, for manufacturers to consider that. But when you're trying to persuade a company to come and locate itself in the UK, there's a range of things you need to try and consider. I mean, the availability of skills, the basic cost of operating that kind of broader infrastructure, the innovation ecosystem and so on. There's a number of factors that will play into whether or not we really can harness the opportunity that Tony described. It's great to be a science superpower, but you want to be able to industrialise that. And that those opportunities are across the UK, not just in Scotland, but there's certainly a Scottish angle on it.
And Maria, I just want to come back to the supply chain issue, because I think the penny has now finally dropped, that things have changed for good. This isn't a temporary blip in that we can sort of go back to how things were done in the past, that, obviously onshoring, reshoring, whatever you want to call it, it is now a reality, and we've got to get to grips with that. But how advanced do you think most organisations are as far as getting to grip with a new reality?
I think in terms of the supply chain, actually, they're struggling to understand how to engage. So you're beginning to see people actually trying to get their head around their Scope 3 emissions. So that's everything that isn't out inside your direct locus of control. So it's your supply chain. And doing things like engaging with them, trying to make that much more collaborative. But often they've got a supply chain who are not understanding what they need. They may want to play, but they don't know what they need to do, because maybe they're an SME where they are living in, well, my deadline's then, that's 2050, So I think there's quite a bit there. What you're seeing is more and more being pushed through in supplier questionnaires and stuff like that. And you're seeing a qualitative approach, but I don't think we've got there with the quantitative. So it is, as with all of this, it's a journey.
Yeah. And actually, SMEs have been brought up many times today and yesterday, and the fact that when it comes to investment, they don't seem to be able to do it for whatever reason that might be. I mean, there was that OECD figure that was bandied around earlier today, 1.7% investment in R&D, which is about half or just over half of the sort of where we should be. And I just wonder what can be done to encourage that increase in investments.
Well, the first steps don't need to be cost. The first steps can be around your demand reduction, making your energy work for you more efficiently, making your materials work for you more efficiently, which comes back again to data, because if you don't know what you're using, then you can't control it. We've seen that even in the MTC. So quite a while ago now, we did a shutdown where we shut off sort of all of the equipment over a weekend. We required a justification for anything that needed to be left on. It was amazing how many bits of kit I got told, well, I don't know whether it'll turn back on. I was like, well, you don't know, so you're turning it off. We turned everything off, and we actually found that if we were more consistent about how we did that, we'd make substantial savings. That year, we saved 100K. So, not all of it, some of it is costly, yes, but some of it might be able to be funded by what you can save. But there is going to need to be help on some of the bigger stuff in one way or another.
Yeah. Chris, your thoughts on SMEs and why, particularly when you're talking about sustainability, that seems to be the area, the types of organisations that are struggling.
Yeah, I think, the rise in energy prices doesn't help everybody focus on energy efficiency, right? I think both at home for just about everybody in the room, but also in manufacturing companies. And people will be looking at examples like Marie gave about just switching machines off. And even big multinationals don't do that and realize the benefits of it. So there's some things that I think SMEs have started to move into doing for themselves, which doesn't have to be terribly complicated to try and do. So there's some encouragement to that. Tuesday of this week, as an industry event by one of the energy companies, SSE, who were basically trying to encourage the supply chain from top to bottom to be much more sustainable, much higher levels of circularity and reuse of the materials from top to bottom. You see in different sectors it's the same sort of pressure coming all the way through the sector for sustainability, circularity, reduction in costs and so on. So I think that there'll be opportunities for SMEs to engage with that. There'll also be expectations in order to win business with increasingly big companies will have an expectation of it. You see some of the car companies already talking about delivering things by net zero supply chain. How true that is, I couldn't comment. But I think the pressure will come from multiple areas, and we do need to support SMEs to get onto that transition. But there's plenty of motivations in the market, I think, for them to do it, and it's just trying to make sure they've got the skills and the investment opportunities to try and do that.
And Tony, from where you sit, are there any extra support or encouragement or help that you think could be given?
For SMEs in particular, I mean, or?
Yes.
I guess it depends on your definition. I mean, a lot of those great companies I talked about that are making us second in Europe are SMEs themselves. They started smaller and now they're medium-sized companies. They don't need too much encouragement to be innovative because they were born innovative. What they need is some of the scale-up capital and patient R&D investment. And there are that issue is recognised, but it's not unique to the UK. And a lot of what we do is to try and help investors understand the landscape and for those investors who want to invest in those companies to do so. I can't make too much comment about sort of existing SMEs that might be termed to be part of the traditional industry only. I would, because I've worked in automotive for 32 years and was responsible for quite a slab of that 1.7% of business R&D. You're right. I can confirm that companies are, when they go out for requests for information and requests for quotation through their supply chain, are increasingly putting in, very specific. So for batteries, it's very specific. You need to comply to the rules of origin, but also around Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. So increasingly, companies can't actually be part of a big automotive supply chain if they aren't doing all of these things, because ultimately the car companies in this particular case want to be able to say to their customers with confidence, this is the LCA associated with our product. These are our Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and so on. And they can't do that unless they understand the complete picture through the supply chain. And the best way to do that is through their commercial interaction with them.
And one thing that does seem to come up again and again is there's, particularly with technology or digitalization or any sort of new investment in that area, that there is, particularly amongst SMEs, this slight sense of once bitten, twice shy, that they have perhaps in the past invested in something that hasn't worked out very well and have got scared at throwing good money after bad. And that's completely understandable. And it's more understandable in a smaller organisation that doesn't have as much money as a bigger organisation. And I wonder how difficult that is to overcome.
I think it's quite a big obstacle. I think probably the best way to relieve that obstacle is collaboration and talking about cross-learning. So if you are a bigger organisation that's managed to implement something, talk to your supply chain about it, engage them. I mean, I talked recently at SME engagement thing for certain customers' sort of supply chain, and they said, well, can we have a sustainability forum where we can share some of this stuff? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it needs. I think sustainability is one of those things that does drive our hand to be a bit more collaborative than maybe we have been to this point.
And would that be your experience, Chris, from your various roles?
Yeah,
that you've had?
I think once bitten, twice shy applies in big companies too, actually. You'd be surprised, at certain technology areas, whether it's in manufacturing or in design, people will feel like they tried this X years ago and we don't want to do it again.
And actually governments, I mean, we've seen that happen with big tech.
Yeah, and even at national level, so there's some opportunities in Scotland right now that people go, but that we did that before, So I think that's a sort of a human nature issue as much as it is for SMEs. SMEs do often have less affordability. That's absolutely the issue for them, and having the opportunity then to be able to afford to take risks and for it to go wrong is definitely a challenge. But I've also experienced it the other way around, where we have, I've had SMEs, particularly in my previous life, who've invested a small amount and has made a massive change in their business, and they're quite the opposite. Instead of twice shy, they're certainly very extrovert. They're certainly at every conference telling everybody about the massive changes made for them. So there are many positive stories to tell. So I think the thing about collaboration is important. The thing about is not to treat SMEs as if they're one thing, and to sort of recognise that where we've had success or where organisations have had success, to share that as widely as possible. And I know that some of the ones that I'm thinking about while I'm talking, they're very keen to try and do that, to kind of share that experience, that it's, if you find the right partners, the right collaboration, you can have a massive impact on your business. And say to find those stories, some of the ones that are underneath Tony's 2.7 billion and so on, and to be able to tell that, to give confidence to the SMEs, there is a way forward.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to some questions. Thank you very much to those who've already sent them in. Plenty of time to send more in, but I've got a good few to be going on with. Question that's just come in. It takes time to create and ramp up factories to build batteries, but what about end-of-life batteries? When should we build our first giga end-of-life processing plant?
The same time.
Oh, okay, sorry, no, pick who to answer that question.
No, you go.
Yes, I think it would be, you're the obvious choice.
No, not the same time is the answer from my perspective. So, because it relates to the previous discussion, you can definitely go too soon. So
things are changing so fast.
No, it's not so much that. It's when will the big feedstock be there? Yeah. So going back to the sort of transition chart that I showed earlier, vehicles last about 10 to 15 years in service. So all the EVs that are on the road today will be on the road today probably for the next 10 years or so. So you can't recycle their batteries. The owners would get very annoyed if you did that. So you have to wait for all of those that feedstock to start coming through. There's some early opportunities around scrap from industrial processes, from gigafactories, but there's some reasonably well understood projections now for the feedstock for recycling. Yeah, but it's literally 10 years behind the production activity. And then there's two bits to that. There's one bit around how do you go from sort of dismantling batteries and sort of triaging batteries that come out of service, and then typically converting them to some sort of recycler via shredding, which is actually quite economically viable, and we think the market will respond to that. But then there's how do you take that product and then turn it into useful precursors to go back into battery manufacturing. That's much more expensive. You need you need about 90 odd gigawatt hours of supply to make that viable. So that the science and the innovation is progressing around that bit at the moment, but the investment won't come until they could see the scale and the feedstock come through. But we will see some early investment. We are already seeing early investment in sort of dismantling, the direct recycling, and what we call packed to black mass. Yeah. But I think the critical area where hopefully everyone would agree is that we can't keep digging stuff out of the ground. We've got to get to the point where this is there's going to be some digging stuff out of the ground to start with, and for a good few years, but we need to get to a point where this is self-sustaining and circular.
Mary?
I think that's the argument for having it here in the UK as well. because it helps
Yeah.
enable that circular economy. And I do think that that's going to be a key part. As much as we can avoid downcycling, the better. There's going to be some, but the ideal would be you'd be able to take an old battery, reprocess it, and make a completely new one. Now there's going to be some wastage.
And the science is the science to do that is understood. It's not all scaled up
Yeah.
yet. But I think the thing we need to bear in mind, which often gets forgotten, is that again, 80% of the battery feedstock that we get in this country won't have been made in this country. There'll be batteries that turn up disguised as cars. Yeah. And they could have come from anywhere. We won't know. We probably won't know their provenance for some considerable time. But we have to have an industry that's capable of taking that reality and be capable of processing that back into useful materials, as you say, right here.
Chris, anything to add on that before I move on?
No, I don't think I'd add anything to what Tony said. I mean, I think all of that argument in batteries applies across a range of different sectors, as I pointed out, whether it's in other metallics or composites or in fashion or across multiple sectors. You could apply the logic that Tony's just described across all of them, I think.
So I'm going to move on to another question. Maria, I think I'll start with you. What kind of data, this questioner asks, do companies track in order to monitor how sustainable they are?
Oh, it's across all sorts of things. So even just on carbon footprint, you need all your energy data, all your waste data. Ideally, you need data from your suppliers on their energy and their waste, and which obviously not everyone will want to share, or at least an explicit figure. Otherwise, you have to do it by spend-based analysis, and then the conversion factors. There's lots of different databases, so you're never going to be able to cross-compare a carbon footprint, for example. But that's just thinking about one of the planetary boundaries. There's 9. We're sort of threatening 6 now, I think, at the last. So if you take that tracking then across to biodiversity, land use, now obviously that's going to affect more sectors at the sort of front end, raw material, more than it maybe will the actual makers, because about 80% of aerospace manufacturing, for example, is raw material and material processing. So you can see sort of, if you start using secondary, you can circumvent some of that. But you can only drive all of that with data. But there's a data element to how do we design? How do we make sure that we are embedding sustainable design principles? Can we use some of the AI and digital tools in that space? I think data is a key to this, but I also think the right data is key to this, because data has a carbon footprint too. Yeah. So I think...
funnily enough, I wanted to touch on that, particularly we're talking about, many people talking about different lifestyle changes, the fact people are working from home, the fact we were hearing earlier, you might be able to get rid of showrooms and you can sell your wares digitally or virtually online. But of course, all of that has an effect, because we keep hearing that WhatsApp uses is worse for the environment than a text message and all these things, and certainly I forget all the time that data brings a carbon footprint with it that I think doesn't get much attention, certainly not from the media. We just think that you send a message, you use the cloud, and it's sort of carbon free, but it's not carbon free. I wonder whether more attention needs to be given to that, Chris.
I think, yeah, in general, because many years ago when I was closer to the IT and computing industry, they were doing things, particularly in large data centers, to try and locate them in renewable energy areas or bury them underground in some way. So there's a series of things that were done, I think, well in advance of that. But the sort of human nature stuff where I've got 2 phones in my pocket and 2 laptops in my bag, and I've got umpteen, I access the internet probably 300 times a day, and all of that sort of data traffic and so on. And you take that at the industrial level, where people are generating terabytes of data and storing it in various places around the world. There is a sustainability agenda to that too that we need to be conscious of, both personally and all the way through to the industrial level. I think in part, just to build on Marie's answer, most companies have just a mass of data, engineering data, product data, quality data, sustainability data. There's various legislative areas where you have to have traceability through supply chains. And it's just a whole host of data. And I think just being able to be much more efficient and effective with the use of data is going to be important rather than just constantly demanding and storing forever more and more of it.
Anything to add to that?
Only that there have been various studies done on the impact of what's known as dark data, so data that's accessed once or less. And I must admit, personally, I was quite shocked by some of the numbers. So it's worth looking out if you're interested. Can't remember them off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
That's what Google's for. We'll use more.
Sorry, just to give you an example. Yeah. So when I was in industry, without quoting the precise examples, we went to look just for our own amusement. How this data that we gathered during the test and development of a product, how often was that data ever accessed after it was gathered? And the answer is massive amounts of it's just never gathered, but then stored for 50 years. So we do that everywhere, I think. We store and gather stuff. It's a bit like just having more stuff shoved in your attic. You just keep piling more stuff in and never go and have a clear out.
Yeah. Question here, which I guess brings it sort of down to the individual. Should companies be helping employees reduce energy, perhaps subsidise employees putting smart controls on their heating systems? It would give an additional benefit of introducing digital benefits. Marie?
Well, I think there is some onus to helping people understand how they can change. And if there was the ability to do that, I think that would be fantastic. I mean, in terms of our own thing, I try to talk about and get other colleagues to talk about what they're doing in their own existence. Silly things like last year, I drove my electric car to Croatia. I took a video log of every time we stopped to charge, and the amount of conversation that I ended up having with various colleagues about how I found the electric vehicle and how it had given them a little bit more comfort in the idea of changing was great. So even those conversations help. But yeah, I think wherever the business can help to people all to understand their own transition and also embed stuff themselves, that's brilliant.
Chris, do you think the challenge to convince businesses to do the right thing is almost too much to start worrying about employees, or do you think it has to be a holistic approach?
I think there is. I mean, most companies provide a level of support for people to make sustainable choices with things like travel and to try and raise awareness of it within the facility. So you'll see, where I work, you'll see that those kind of notifications are made. People are being advised to switch things off, as Marie said earlier on, to make choices about how you travel, whether it's on the train or cycle to work schemes and so on. So I think there's a lot of support in that sense. We have no imminent plans to financially support people to get smart meters or anything within their own home. But we try to make it visible for people in the hope that people will see the impact that they personally can have and to make better choices.
Interesting questions just come in. Are we backing the right horse? What about energy conversion from non-carbon fuels like hydrogen or magnesium? Is there a danger that these get crowded out as we focus on EV applications?
I'll take that one. So I think the first thing I would do is remind everyone that there is no law in this country that says you must have a battery electric vehicle or you're going to have a battery. All of the legislation here, Europe, everywhere, is around zero emission vehicles. Yeah, and having designed cars and designed EVs in my career, it's not the government that are telling car companies to go EV. It's car companies that have looked at. I mean, we had hydrogen fuel cell vehicles running around when I was in Ford research in the 1990s. Yeah, this is not new. It's not. And so car companies and engineers understand the technical, business and commercial merits of all of the technologies, and they will have designed prototypes for most of them. Yeah. So the reason that the industry is focusing on battery electric vehicles is that they most closely match the customer business and commercial requirements for the transition. So even if you tried, for example, to go and source, even if you were at Jaguar Land Rover type scale, and you went to source fuel cells for all of your vehicles for 2035, you simply could not place an order to do that. There is just no way to, and even if there was, you couldn't do that at a cost that would be acceptable to a customer. Yeah. So this isn't just always about what's the right technology from a technology perspective. Yeah. So now, having said that, could fuel cell costs come down and green hydrogen, be abundant and so on? Quite possibly. And if that got to a position where it was where the car industry decided to migrate that way, there would be a huge cost associated with that, because there's a huge cost associated with transitioning to battery electric vehicle. But we shall see. Never say never would be my mantra there. But my response to those kind of questions is inherent in the question is perhaps a lack of understanding of the dynamics of how industry works and who is making the decision. Yeah, the governments are not telling car companies to go battery electric vehicles. Car companies have decided that is the best way to meet the upcoming regulations, and they've tried most technologies over the years. But again, having said all of that, if the technical, business, and commercial equation for alternative technologies changes in the future, and there is a business case to do all the capital transition that would be associated with that, then maybe it could happen.
Mary?
I think to just pick up on one tiny bit there, the abundance of green hydrogen is a challenge, because obviously you get losses in the system. Green hydrogen is made currently or by using green electricity, and you get losses from making the hydrogen from the electricity. So if we're struggling with our electricity constraints on the grid, we're not going to have the abundant green hydrogen. And we already use quite a lot of hydrogen in its black, brown, various other rainbow-hued forms that we need to replace with green hydrogen. So I think it'll be a while before we have that abundance.
And a question just made me think of it. Was it Croatia you drove to? With that, bearing that in mind, so this question has just come in. Where will EV range get to? Could we get to 1,000 miles?
I don't think we're going to want to, essentially. So, in fact, there's a lot of talk about whether the next generation of EVs might have slightly shorter range than some of the ones that are out there today, but have much faster charging. Yeah. So typically, it isn't range anxiety you have driving an EV; it's charging anxiety that you have. Whether you can stop and get access to the charging that you need.
And that's actually an area that we should have touched on, because that's been a constant criticism that we're way behind.
But if anyone's bladder can stand 1,000 miles journey, non-stop, then maybe. But typically, if you're driving distances, you need to stop, and if you can recharge in a sensible time, and we sort of, in the work that we do, we think that's about 12 miles a minute of recharging minimum that you need to sort of be able to acquire. If you can do that, and if you can do that where you want, when you want, then the chances are you're never going to need 1,000-mile range battery electric vehicle.
Marie, there's a specific question that's come in for you. What is the MTC obligated to do by law around business sustainability, and what are the MTC doing additionally to become more sustainable?
So we have to SECA report, which is our scope 1 and 2 emissions. We have to ESOS report, which is around energy efficiency. We have requests particularly from governmental supply contracts to have a net zero plan. I personally report to the board certain key metrics, some of which we're still trying to understand how to develop. So the metric is, or the target is to get to a point where we have a value, and that's against carbon footprint, water footprint, waste intensity, biodiversity, social value, and percentage of projects that have a really clear, sustainable impact within manufacturing, and what the mix of our projects looks like. Okay, so that's where we're trying to get to.
Chris, a question that I'm going to put to you, and also add one of my own. So the question that's just come in is, are alternative sources of energy like water and solar an option for manufacturing plants? And I wanted to pick up, you were talking about wind, offshore wind.
Yep.
And I noticed you didn't mention onshore in person, but it was in a bracket. And then you were also talking about recycling of wind turbines. And I'd love to know a bit more about, because you were saying it's not possible at the moment. A bit more about that. That sounded very interesting.
If I'd shown you the picture, there's some pretty gory pictures of people just putting them in the ground in landfill sites when they come to their end of life.
No, really people, green.
Yeah, wonderful. And if you take in China, I think in 2035, it's about 750,000 tons of turbine blades will get to the end of their life. We just put them in the ground, and you can imagine the scale of that. So there's a big opportunity in that, and there's more expectation
what are they
within
made
industry.
Of? I should know that.
Composites. So most of them are composites. So it's a mixture of resin and fibres. So the thing you have to be able to do is separate those out. The dream goal, it's a bit like in a battery case, is to be able to take the basic components of a turbine blade and be able to return it to its original use.
And what's the lifespan of a turbine? 15
years or so, so it's still a pretty long life cycle. So you can extend the life, make them last longer. That's good. You can turn turbine blades into tennis rackets. That's slightly better, but it keeps them alive for longer.
A very big tennis racket.
But ultimately, you want to be able to return them back to the original purpose. It'll be the same in the battery case and other metallic components. So the recycling of that stuff is really a big issue. It's the same with aircraft. At the minute, we're just doing some work with a dismantled aircraft that's also made of composites, and trying to work out then how can we recycle that and to be able to go back into its original purpose. So again, it's not airplanes back into tennis rackets and golf clubs or skis. It's into turning that back into aircraft grade quality material. And I think if we do that, then as Tony said, you're not taking it out of the earth anymore. It's an ongoing issue, and you can be much more sustainable. So yeah, enormous opportunity, I think, for us to avoid doing the wrong thing. And that pressure, and there was an industry forum, say, this week, where there was enormous pressure coming from the operators as well. So it's not just the providers of this equipment, it's all the way through that value chain are pushing this agenda.
And the question, water and solar as an option for manufacturing plants. I mean, I don't think a lot of plants do use solar, not exclusively, but...
We've got about, on the picture of the building we've got about 1,600 solar panels on the roof. We run off a community heating system. We're as sustainable as we possibly can be in the building. Some of the load you can take, so depending on the sort of the power density and so on, the power requirements you have for factories, then it can be different. And obviously you've got the problem with renewables where it's variable and seasonal. If you're in Scotland, relying on the sun shining is probably less a good idea, but it's like the overall energy picture. It needs to work in complement with other sources.
Tony, what do you think about water and solar for manufacturing plants?
I think there's already quite a few trials in that area. So similar to on our battery industrialization centre, we haven't got it yet, but we're going to put 1.5 megawatts of solar arrays on the roof with a battery storage system, and a lot of that is never waste a good energy crisis. It's being stimulated by the current cost of energy. So don't underestimate the power of that. But there's a number of trials. So there's a trial called the HyNet program in the northwest, which is using renewable sources, generating some hydrogen, actually using that hydrogen for industrial use. So some of this stuff is being trialled at scale at the moment.
Well, I think at that point, that's probably, and I'll give the three of you a chance. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want people to, because this is the final word of the event. Is there anything that you want people to think about that perhaps we haven't underlined today or yesterday? money-making opportunities?
I think so. What I'm struck by in my time, my current role, is the combination of massive opportunities that this presents, but also challenges. I think if I just go back to that wind example and potentially batteries too, we've got an enormous opportunity with an emerging market, but equally, if we don't move quick enough, we might miss that opportunity. So I think that exists all the way through the supply chain. That sense I have of enormous opportunity if we get it right, and risks if we don't move quick enough.
Tony?
I think I'd like to just inject a note of optimism into everything, actually, because not blind optimism, but there's a load of stuff we're really good at, and we've got a lot of skills and a lot of technology that's very relevant to the challenges that we face. So I think whilst we've all been fairly clear about some of the challenges and some of the speed at which things need to happen, and there's an awful lot of capital investment needed, and other countries are investing a lot as well. We need to remain grounded but optimistic.
Maria, it makes sense for me to give the final word to part of the home team.
I just think I'd like to emphasise that that demand reduction piece isn't talked about enough, and let's collaborate. We're more powerful together than we are on our own. So let's take the energy of that and take it forward and get this thing licked.
Well, I think that collaboration, we've certainly been set an example yesterday and today. There's been a lot of collaboration, a lot of ideas transferred and exchanged and given for free. So that's been really, really exciting and interesting. As I ask the panel to leave the stage, would you give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? And with that, that just leaves me to wrap up and obviously to say a really, really big thank you, not only to all the speakers we've had yesterday and today, but of course to all of you, the thousands of you joining us remotely, looking after your carbon footprint by not travelling, and those who did travel here to Coventry to be here in person. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and I've learnt a lot, and I do hope that everyone else has too. Of course, we have covered so much ground. I'm not going to try to repeat or to conclude on all of it, but obviously digital skills, it really was skills. None of this is achievable without the human beings, which is reassuring. Everyone keeps saying, robotics, AI, it's going to take all our jobs, coming over here and taking all our jobs. Well, that's not the case. We know that we've got a huge skills gap. We know that we've got 95,000 jobs in this industry that are sitting vacant, but we know that if those jobs become more digital, if there's training that comes alongside those jobs are, as somebody said earlier, a bit sexier, and that's got to be good news as far as recruitment is concerned. And of course, collaboration. I think Maria was absolutely right. That's been such a big theme of the last couple of days. Of course, I need to thank the sponsors. As I keep saying, nothing on this scale can be achieved without the collaboration and the support from the sponsors. So a big thank you to Lloyds, to PTC, Epicor, Atlas Copco and Sim Portal. We are very, very grateful to all of them. And there will be, I need to tell you, that next year's event is already being planned. So you will be getting an email sometime soon. So look out for it in your inbox, which will be sending you to the link where you can register your interest for next year. The website is nmsummit.co.uk/2024. And you'll get some information and advance warning about next year's event. And you can, as I said, you can register your interest there. We will be staying here. The doors will be open until about 5 o'clock if anybody wants to talk to anybody about today's events, anything that you've heard that you think that the organisation can help you with or you want to discuss further, please do have a word with all of that. And as I said, the videos from yesterday and today will also be available. So if you missed any of the sessions, you can catch up. And there has been a lot of information, really useful information. So I hope that that will be used. And just leaves for me to say thank you so much and good luck. Bye-bye.
You were right. get enough of you. Leave it all to gloom. You were right. I know I can't get enough of you. No, the things that I would do under the water. I'm sinking further down, floating on nothing. I'm nothing. Arms are wide open. I'm calling out your name, sitting and waiting. I'm waiting. You were right. I know I can't get enough of you. You were right. I know I can't get enough of you. Leave it all to bloom. You were right. I know I can't get enough of you. The things that I would do. Cold in the river, lips moving, there's no sound. Pulling me under, I'm under. You're giving me